I was 42 years old the morning. A woman pointed at me across the marble counter of a bank I owned and shouted, "Get him out! He doesn't belong here!" Her voice cut through the lobby like glass breaking. The officer beside me grinned as he slid cold steel cuffs around my wrists. He didn't know. She didn't know. None of them knew. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to me. I stood perfectly still, pressed shirt, plain slacks, no tie. I didn't resist as the cuffs clicked shut. A camera phone somewhere in the crowd caught the moment. A hush fell. The woman's finger still aimed at my chest like a weapon. To her, I was already guilty. To the room, I was invisible, just another black man being escorted out for daring to exist in a space designed to keep people like me out. What they didn't see was the calm behind my eyes. I'd seen this scene before, 20 years ago in a lobby half this size, when a loan officer told me my savings looked suspicious. 10 years later, when a branch manager tore up my application for a line of credit even though my assets outmatched his annual budget. Every version of this moment left a scar, and yet here I was again, not as a client begging for access, but as the majority shareholder of the very institution they were weaponizing against me. The officer tugged lightly on the chain, urging me toward the door. I didn't move. My silence unnerved him. I could feel the shift in the air, the difference between someone being thrown out and someone allowing the storm to build. Around us, the lobby glittered with chandeliers, polished marble floors, the kind of excess wealth meant to intimidate. But all I saw were cracks, thin lines running through the performance of power. "Sir, you need to step outside," the officer muttered, still half smiling as if this was routine. I turned my head slowly, not at him, but at the trembling teller in the corner holding my ID and account number in her hand. She avoided my gaze. She'd been the first to flag me. She'd whispered, "Possible fraud," into her headset without even running my name. I inhaled once, steady. Every humiliation from years past gathered in my chest, not to explode, but to anchor me. Because I knew something they didn't. In less than 5 minutes, the only accounts that would be frozen in this bank were theirs. And so I let the cuffs stay. I let the woman's voice echo one more time across the lobby, because sometimes the most powerful move is to give them enough rope to hang themselves while the world watches. I hadn't dressed like a CEO that morning. No tailored suit, no Rolex, no entourage trailing behind me, just a pale blue shirt, sleeves rolled neatly at the wrist, and black shoes polished enough to look respectable but plain enough to go unnoticed. That was intentional. I wanted to see what would happen if I walked into my own bank as just another man. The Summit Financial Tower loomed like a fortress of glass and steel above downtown. Inside, the lobby gleamed with gold accents and quiet chandeliers, a theater built for wealth. It smelled of polished stone and perfumed air, every detail screaming exclusivity. And yet, when I stepped across that floor, the silence was heavier than welcome. The receptionist's eyes lingered on me too long. The security guard's hand hovered near his belt. Suspicion came before service. I approached the counter, gave my name, and requested access to a high-value account verification. Nothing unusual, nothing that should have caused alarm. But the moment my ID left my hand, the room shifted. Whispers, side glances, a clerk disappearing into a back office, returning with a manager who already wore disdain like perfume. I knew the type. They didn't see me as a professional, as a client, as a man with generational wealth on his shoulders. They saw an intruder in a pressed shirt, someone who must have borrowed credibility, not built it. Years of calculated silence had taught me one thing. You don't correct people's assumptions, you let them play their hand. Because the louder they insist you don't belong, the harder the truth will land when it drops. The manager leaned across the counter, her voice sharp. "These credentials don't add up. We'll need to involve law enforcement. No hesitation, no courtesy." She spoke it like policy, but it was nothing more than prejudice in uniform. I glanced at the clock above her head, 10:06 a.m. 10 minutes later, the entire branch would be unrecognizable. But for now, I simply nodded, letting the cuffs come, letting the cameras rise. This wasn't the first time I'd walked into a building to test the weight of bias. 2 decades earlier, I'd been denied a basic credit card even though I'd already closed on 3 properties. I remembered the smirk of the banker who said, "People like you should start smaller." That memory still burned, not as shame but as fuel. Today, I wasn't here to be fueled. I was here to finish something. The system that had humiliated me at 22 was about to learn what it meant to underestimate me at 42. So when the officer tugged again at the cuffs, I let the steel bite my wrists and kept my voice silent. The real power wasn't in what I said. It was in what was about to happen when the truth came crashing through their polished walls. The cuffs weren't the beginning. They were the crescendo of whispers that had started the moment I handed over my ID. At first, it was subtle. The teller tapped her keyboard once. Then again, frowning as though the numbers on the screen couldn't possibly be correct. She leaned toward her colleague, voice low but not low enough. High-value account? In his name? Check again. Her colleague smirked, tilting the monitor slightly out of my view as if the data itself were a private joke. Then came the manager, a woman in her 30s with a sharp blazer and sharper tone. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask for clarification. She simply scanned me from head to toe like she was reading a mistake. "These documents don't look right," she said. "Sir, where exactly did you get this account number?" "I earned it," I replied evenly. She scoffed. "That's not an answer." Her voice rose just enough for the clients in line to hear. A ripple of murmurs followed, and suddenly the weight of the room shifted against me. A young banker stepped forward, trying too hard to impress her. "Ma'am, should I call it in?" "We had that incident last month. Fake IDs, stolen numbers." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The assumption filled the air before the words did. I stood silent. Every dismissive glance, every muttered accusation, it was the same script I had lived through too many times. Only now, it was playing out in a bank whose balance sheets carried my signature. The manager leaned back, folding her arms. "I've seen this before," she declared loudly. "A bold claim, a fancy card, and nothing to back it up. You think you can just walk in here and access millions?" Someone in the lobby chuckled. Another muttered, "Unbelievable." That was when she made the call. Not to compliance, not to corporate, straight to security. Her voice was crisp, rehearsed. Suspicious activity at the front desk. Possibly fraudulent account access. Send an officer immediately. The words struck like a gavel. Final. Irrevocable. I let them wash over me, my face unreadable. Inside, I marked the timestamp. 10 minutes. That's all I would need. Within moments, the officer appeared a tall man in uniform, his grin too casual for the seriousness of the situation. He slapped the cuffs on without hesitation, as though my presence alone justified the restraint. The manager pointed at me again, satisfied, like she had solved some great deception. "See?" she said to the crowd gathering near the velvet ropes. "This is how we protect real clients." Real clients. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with everything it implied. I kept my silence. Because the louder their certainty grew, the sweeter the collapse would sound when the truth finally landed. The metal of the cuffs pressed against my wrists, cold but not unfamiliar. I didn't flinch. I didn't resist. I simply stood there, anchored to the marble floor as if the weight of the building itself had settled into my stance. The officer tugged lightly, expecting panic, perhaps a plea. Instead, he found stillness. That silence unsettled him more than any struggle could have. He muttered almost to himself, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't answer. The manager folded her arms, her chin lifted in triumph. To her, my calm meant concession. She mistook quiet for weakness, composure for guilt. That was her mistake, and I let her have it. The lobby buzzed with whispers now, every spectator trying to decode who I was and why the scene felt both ordinary and wrong. A woman near the line whispered, "If he was guilty, wouldn't he be fighting back?" A man shook his head. "Doesn't matter. They wouldn't cuff him without a reason." Their certainty was the echo of decades of conditioning. If the institution says you don't belong, you must not belong. But I had learned long ago that the strongest voice in the room is often the one that doesn't rise. At 23, I had shouted when a landlord tried to evict me without cause. My voice cracked, my chest ached, but no one listened. At 29, I argued when a boardroom dismissed my proposal before I finished my first slide. The louder I fought, the quicker they tuned me out. Silence became my strategy, not because I lacked words, but because I knew when to let others bury themselves beneath their own noise. So here, in the center of a bank I owned, I chose quiet again. Not because I accepted the insult, but because I understood the stage. Every word hurled at me, every accusation, every smirk, it wasn't evidence against me. It was testimony against them. The officer tugged once more, impatient. The cuffs rattled like a clock ticking down. I let them. Every second bought me another witness, another phone raised discreetly, another story waiting to be told beyond these walls. The manager's voice cut across the lobby again, sharp and loud. Fraudulent accounts, stolen ID. We don't tolerate this. Her words struck the air like verdicts. Yet each syllable sounded less like authority and more like desperation to anyone truly listening. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaled once, and exhaled. My stillness wasn't surrender, it was preparation. Because in less than 5 minutes, their certainty would collapse under the weight of truth. And when it did, no one would remember their noise. They would remember my silence. It started with a red light. At the edge of the lobby, a young man in a gray hoodie raised his phone, thumb trembling slightly as the camera focused on the cuffs locked around my wrists. He wasn't loud. He didn't interfere. He simply whispered to the lens, "This doesn't feel right." Across the room, another witness stirred. A woman in a navy suit, maybe mid-30s, clutched her handbag tighter, eyes narrowing as she watched the officer tug at me. She leaned to the person beside her and said just loud enough to carry, "Why are they arresting him? He hasn't done anything." The whispers spread. Not a roar, not yet, but a hum, low and persistent, like static before a storm. The manager noticed. Her eyes flicked to the phone in the hoodie's hand. "Put that away," she snapped. "Recording inside this lobby is prohibited." Her words cracked like a whip, but the young man didn't move. He kept filming, his breathing audible, his silence louder than defiance. The officer shifted, uncomfortable now, sensing the shift in the room. Authority feels unshakable until an audience starts doubting it. He cleared his throat, pulling me toward the door with more force this time, hoping momentum would silence the crowd. It didn't. A voice rose from the back, quiet at first, then stronger. "Why is he in handcuffs? Did you even verify his account?" Heads turned. Someone muttered, "Exactly. This looks bad." The manager's jaw tightened. "Security protocols are not up for debate," she barked. But her words didn't land with the weight she expected. They landed like excuses. And still, I remained silent. My calm became a mirror, reflecting their frenzy back at them. Each accusation sounded shriller. Each command rang hollower. The crowd wasn't seeing a fraud in chains. They were seeing an institution unravel in real time. Another phone appeared. Then another. Small red recording lights dotted the lobby like fireflies. For every attempt to silence one witness, 3 more voices stirred. The woman in the navy suit finally stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her conviction didn't. "I've banked here for 12 years. I've never seen anyone treated like this without proof. Something's wrong." The officer froze, caught between duty and doubt. The manager's face paled. She could feel control slipping, inch by inch, replaced by scrutiny she couldn't command. And I stood still, wrists bound, head high, because I knew what they didn't. This was no longer just my story. It was becoming theirs. And the world outside these marble walls was already watching. The crowd's murmurs hadn't cooled the fire. They had only stoked it. From behind the glass doors of a side office, another figure emerged, a senior manager in a tailored charcoal suit. His steps were slow, deliberate, meant to project control, but the stiffness in his jaw betrayed something else. Annoyance, even fear. He scanned the room, then fixed his gaze on me. "This is over," he announced, his voice heavy with authority. "Remove him, now." The officer hesitated. The phones recording from every angle were impossible to ignore. "Sir, protocol." The manager cut him off, slicing the air with his hand. "Protocol is irrelevant. He is not a client. He's an imposter." The words hit harder than the cuffs. Not because they were true, but because of the certainty with which he said them. He didn't flinch, didn't waver. He had judged me the moment he walked out of that office, and nothing would change his verdict. A gasp rippled through the lobby. Someone whispered, "Did he just call him an imposter?" Another voice followed, "How do they know?" Doubt was no longer quiet, it was spreading. The manager leaned closer, his tone sharp enough to pierce. "We've seen this scam before. Men like you walking in here, pretending to belong. But not today, not in my branch. Men like you." The phrase echoed, louder than the chandeliers above us. My silence made space for everyone else to hear what those words really meant. The young man in the hoodie raised his phone higher. "You're assuming without proof," he muttered. A few heads nodded. A few more voices joined, challenging. But the manager only doubled down. He turned to his staff, his face flushed. "Deactivate any pending transactions under this name. Flag his account. Effective immediately. A junior clerk froze at her station, fingers trembling above the keyboard. Sir, we haven't confirmed. Do it, he barked. The sound cracked across the lobby like thunder. The clerk flinched, then looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I remained still. Because every insult, every rash command, every reckless order, they weren't building a case against me. They were writing their own downfall, word by word. The senior manager didn't see it. He thought louder meant stronger. He thought certainty could replace truth. But the audience was shifting. Every raised phone, every sharp inhale, every whispered protest, they were already choosing sides. And I knew which side history always remembers. The room had already turned brittle, but what happened next shattered it. The senior manager snatched the folder from the junior clerk's hands. My account documents, verification papers, ID copies scattered across the counter. He didn't glance at them. He didn't review. Instead, with deliberate cruelty, he tore the top sheet clean down the middle. The sound echoed through the marble lobby like fabric ripping in a cathedral. This is worthless, he declared, and so is whatever story you're trying to sell. Gasps broke out. Phones tilted higher. The young man in the hoodie whispered into his camera, "He just tore it up. He didn't even look at it." The officer's grip on my arm tightened, uneasy now. Even he could sense the shift, the thin line between enforcing policy and watching it collapse. But the manager wasn't finished. He reached across the counter, grabbed the black card I had placed there earlier, and held it up between two fingers as though it might stain him. His lip curled. Fake. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed it into a drawer behind the desk and slammed it shut. The drawer clicked like a lock sealing shut, but the sound was hollow. Everyone in the room knew what they had just witnessed, theft masquerading as authority. "You're done here," he said. His voice was final, like a gavel. "Officer, escort him out. Better yet, call dispatch. Let the police take it from here. I'm filing a report for attempted fraud and impersonation." The officer blinked. "You want to escalate?" "Yes," the manager snapped, loud enough for the recording phones to capture every syllable. "This man tried to steal from this institution. He doesn't belong here, and he never will." The words rang, sharp and absolute, but in the silence that followed, they sounded less like power and more like desperation. The woman in the navy suit finally broke her composure. "That's theft," she said loudly. "You can't take his card. You can't tear his papers." Her voice trembled, but her outrage carried. Several heads turned. Whispers swelled. Someone near the back muttered, "This isn't policy. This is personal." I stood motionless, wrists bound, gaze steady, because I understood this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment they went too far, crossed the line from suspicion into open violation. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. Not for them. The paper lay in shreds across the marble counter. My card was locked away in a drawer I technically owned. And yet, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I simply shifted my weight slightly, enough to make the officer pause mid-step. Then, quietly, I spoke for the first time in minutes. "Carla," I said into the small earpiece tucked discreetly against my collar. "Initiate Protocol 6. There was a beat of silence, then a crisp voice replied in my ear. "Understood, sir. Freezing all active transactions within the branch. Compliance board notified. Internal audit recording now live." I closed my eyes briefly. "Time-stamp everything. Capture every word." "Already logging," Carla confirmed. The officer frowned, noticing my lips move. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. His grip tightened as if control might slip through his fingers. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Behind the counter, the manager barked orders to his team, but his words faltered as the clerk's monitor flickered. One screen went black, then another. Error messages cascaded across the system, Windows freezing mid-task. The clicking of keyboards filled the air, desperate, frantic. "Sir, the system just locked me out," the clerk stammered. "What do you mean locked you out?" the manager snapped. He leaned over the desk, tapping keys himself. Nothing. Red alerts flashed. Access revoked. User suspended. A murmur rippled through the staff. Confusion. Fear. They didn't know what was happening, but I did. Carla's voice was steady in my ear. "Branch-level access terminated. Managers included. They'll figure it out in 30 seconds. "Good," I murmured. The officer tugged at me again, more uncertain now. "What's going on?" His tone was no longer smug, but wary. The manager, however, still clung to his script. "Don't listen to him. He's bluffing. Call Central Security. Now. But the call didn't go through. The landline on the desk blinked red, disabled. The clerk picked it up, pressed buttons, shook her head. It's dead, sir. The room shifted. Authority no longer belonged to the man shouting. It belonged to silence, the silence I wore, the silence now filled with questions no one could answer. Carla's voice came again, calm and clinical. Would you like me to pull the surveillance feed, sir? Stream live to corporate? I let the words hang, then finally lifted my head to meet the manager's eyes. For the first time all morning, I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. You should have checked twice before you tore up the papers, because in this building, every mistake you make doesn't disappear. It gets recorded. The crowd stirred, phones tilted higher. The balance had shifted, and I hadn't even revealed who I was yet. The manager's face was red now, not with confidence, but with the creeping heat of doubt. His commands weren't landing. His staff was frozen, their screens useless, their phones dead lines in their hands. And yet, he still clung to performance. Escort him out, he barked again, louder this time, as if volume could restore control. The officer hesitated. His grip on my arm loosened slightly. His eyes darted from the broken systems to the growing crowd, to the dozens of recording phones. Authority had begun to fracture, and he could feel it slipping through his fingers. That was when I lifted my head fully and spoke not to him, not to the manager, but to the entire room. My name, I said slowly, each syllable deliberate, is Daniel Cole. I am the CEO of Summit Enterprises, and 2 years ago, my company acquired this bank. Silence, heavy, absolute, then gasps. Someone near the velvet rope muttered, Wait, Summit? He owns this place? Another voice followed, shaky but certain. I read about that merger. He's telling the truth. The officer's hand fell away from my arm. The cuffs still bound my wrists, but the weight of them had shifted. They were no longer symbols of guilt. They were evidence of someone else's mistake. The manager's jaw slackened. That's impossible, he stammered. His certainty cracked into disbelief. If you were who you claim, we'd know. You would, I said, my voice calm as steel. If you had bothered to check my name before you tore up my documents. Phones angled closer. The crowd wasn't just watching now, they were bearing witness. The woman in the navy suit stepped forward, her tone trembling with conviction. I knew I recognized you. Forbes cover, last year. You turned this bank around. The hoodie-clad witness whispered into his phone. He's the owner. They cuffed the owner. His live stream comments flooded faster, hearts and shocked emojis racing up the screen. The manager shook his head, refusing the truth even as it crushed him. You're bluffing. This is some kind of stunt. I glanced once toward the shattered papers at his feet, then back at him. A stunt doesn't freeze your branch's systems. A stunt doesn't shut down your phone lines, and a stunt doesn't own the building you're standing in. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of realization, of shame, of the dawning horror of what they had done. The officer stepped back, removing his hand entirely. Sir, his words faltered. Authority no longer belonged to him. And as the weight of my identity settled over the room, I felt the balance of power shift completely. The bank no longer had me in its grasp. It was the other way around. The revelation didn't just land, it detonated. The lobby, moments ago heavy with accusation, erupted into a storm of whispers and gasps. Phones shot higher, recording every detail as if history itself were unfolding in front of them. Someone near the door clapped once, then again, until the sound became applause rippling through the crowd. The officer stepped back entirely now, his hands raised as though releasing himself from the mistake, his face drained of color. Sir, I didn't know, he muttered. The cuffs still circled my wrists, but he no longer dared to touch them. Behind the counter, the junior clerk's fingers trembled above her useless keyboard. She looked at the red error flashing across the screen, then back at me. Her lips parted, but no words came. Regret flickered in her eyes, regret and fear. The manager, though, was paralyzed. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, no sound finding its way out. His certainty, so sharp moments ago, had dissolved into a pale mask of shock. He looked smaller under the chandelier's glow, diminished by the weight of his own arrogance. Is this real? A guest whispered to her friend, phone shaking as she filmed. He owns this bank? Another answered louder, Yes, I saw his name in Forbes, Summit Enterprises. This is him. The woman in the navy suit folded her arms, a grim satisfaction on her face. "You tried to humiliate him," she said to the manager. "But the only thing exposed today is you." Laughter burst from somewhere in the crowd, half disbelief, half relief, and then a chorus of voices rose, sharp enough to cut through the marble stillness. "Take the cuffs off!" someone shouted. Another joined. "This is illegal." The officer fumbled at his belt, keys jangling as he scrambled to undo what should never have been done. Each click of the lock echoed in the cavernous lobby until finally the cuffs fell away. The steel hit the floor with a hollow clang that seemed louder than any word spoken that morning. The young man in the hoodie turned his camera toward his own face, breathless. They cuffed the CEO. They tore his papers. They stole his card. And now, look. He swung the lens back to me. He just took his bank back without raising his voice. The comments on his live stream poured in shocked faces, furious words, applause emojis filling the screen. In real time, the story had left the marble lobby and spread into living rooms, offices, and bus rides across the city. And still, I hadn't raised my voice once. The manager sank against the counter, pale and sweating, as the world he thought he controlled slipped completely beyond his reach. His staff avoided his eyes, already bracing for what was to come. The balance of power had turned. They weren't watching a man being escorted out anymore. They were watching an empire reclaim its ground. The cuffs had barely hit the floor when I reached for my earpiece again. My voice stayed calm, even measured, but every syllable carried the weight of finality. "Carla," I said, "terminate branch access for manager ID 4729. Effective immediately." Her response was crisp, cutting through the air like a gavel. "Confirmed. Manager credentials revoked. Access terminated." The senior manager's computer blinked once, then went black. His login badge buzzed red against his chest. He tapped the keyboard in desperation, but nothing responded. His world had just collapsed in front of an audience. I didn't stop. "Extend the termination to any staff complicit in this incident. Freeze their accounts for audit." One by one, screens across the counter flickered red. Clerks gasped as their systems logged them out. Passwords rejected. Authority erased. A junior staff member whispered, "I just lost access. My screen's locked." Another backed away from her station, hands trembling. The manager's voice finally returned, but it cracked under the weight of panic. You can't do this. Not here. Not in front of them." I met his eyes, steady. "That's exactly where it needs to happen. In the same lobby where you tried to erase me." Gasps swelled again. Some guests applauded. Others simply watched in stunned silence, their cameras documenting every second. "Carla," I continued, "mark this branch for immediate compliance review. All incidents recorded. Forward the footage to corporate legal." "Already in motion," she confirmed. The officer stood awkwardly to the side now, hands resting on his belt with nothing to do. He knew better than to speak. His silence was the only shield he had left. The young man in the hoodie, still streaming live, spoke to his viewers with wide eyes. "This isn't just justice. He's dismantling them. Right here. Right now." The manager lunged forward, his voice hoarse with desperation. "You're ruining lives!" I shook my head. "No, you ruined your own the moment you mistook silence for weakness." The weight of those words sank into the marble floor, into the crowd, into every trembling staff member who had stood by. Authority had shifted entirely. And in that moment, punishment wasn't chaos. It was order, restored. The lobby had fallen into silence again, but it was no longer the silence of suspicion. It was the silence of realization. Employees stood frozen at their stations, stripped of the authority they had once wielded so carelessly. Guests held their phones high, recording the aftermath of a spectacle that would outlive the morning. The officer shifted his weight, eyes lowered, waiting for a command he knew would never come. I bent slowly, picked the cuffs up from the marble floor, and set them gently on the counter. The clatter was soft, almost ceremonial, a reminder of what had been attempted and what had failed. Then I turned to the crowd. My voice carried, calm but undeniable. "You saw what happened here. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout for respect. I stood silent while they revealed themselves. And in the end, the truth did all the speaking I needed." A murmur rippled through the guests' agreement, approval, even awe. I let the weight of the moment linger before finishing. Justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with restraint. Sometimes the loudest answer is silence, paired with power. Remember that the next time someone tells you that you don't belong. The woman in the navy suit began to clap again. this time joined by others. Applause filled the lobby, not for me alone, but for the message etched into the marble walls by what they had witnessed. The manager sat slumped behind the counter, eyes glazed with the knowledge that his career had ended in the same lobby where he tried to humiliate me. His downfall wasn't my victory, it was the inevitable result of his own arrogance. I adjusted my cuffs, straightened my shirt, and turned toward the doors. As I stepped into the morning light, phone still raised behind me, I left them with one final line: I don't need to record my victories. I am the result at the end of every recording. The doors closed softly at my back, sealing the moment in marble and glass. But beyond those walls, the story had already escaped into timelines, into headlines, into every corner where dignity and justice were long overdue. And as I walked away, I knew the world hadn't just watched a man reclaim his place. It had witnessed what happens when silence becomes the sharpest form of power.